discuss the budget and more, we welcome Doug Hanks, County Hall reporter for the Miami Herald. Doug, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, okay, let's start with what happened early in the week. The millage rate was set in the county, and even though it was a long meeting, a lot of supporters for the libraries came out. They actually got the millage slightly increased.
Yeah, it's interesting. What happened, the commissioners had to set the maximum tax rate essentially for the budget that will be approved in the fall. And so they can set it higher and go lower. You can't set it lower and then go above that. And my takeaway from the budget was Mayor Carlson really got what he wanted, which was leverage against the unions. The unions wanted a higher tax rate for the big ones, the big countywide tax, the big fire tax. There was a big show of force from the fire department union. They didn't get it. The commissioners went with the mayor's recommendation, which was a teeny little decrease in the countywide and the fire tax in order to shift some taxing power over to the library district. Now, where Carlos Jimenez lost was on the library tax. The commissioners bucked his recommendation and said, we want to give a little bit of a higher library tax rate, which will allow us, oddly, to continue current funding. You needed a big tax increase in libraries to even have a small cut in funding because the library tax was cut a couple years ago and they've been living off cash reserves ever since.
And the cash reserves are gone. The mayor did make a campaign promise that he would not raise taxes, and he's sticking to that. So the issue is, will he veto that increase in library funding?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, the mayor has definitely gotten away or moved towards raising taxes twice, right? Last year he said it's time for a property tax increase and then backed off quickly when he said there was some opposition that was too strong. And then this year he hinted at, well, maybe we could ask the voters to give us permission to raise taxes, and he backed off that when there was no support. So now he is facing a proposal that would have a higher overall tax rate than exists right now because of the library funding. Will he veto it? Don't know, don't want to make predictions. You're not hearing signals from County Hall that you will.
It's an increase that, according to, it was probably your article, for an average homeowner with homestead exemption of a $200,000 home, the increase would be $15 a year.
Right. Now that's the rate. But what's going to be interesting, what's at play here is when taxpayers get the actual notice, the trim notice, saying this is what your taxes are probably going to be, it's going to be higher. Now the library tax will have a role in that, but there's higher tax for Jackson. There's that recent tax increase for the school system. So the bill is longer than what's at stake.
Because those higher taxes for Jackson and for the school system is what voters approved with the bond issue.
Right. And so, there's no tax bills on election day when you go to check them. It sounds good, but when those bills come, and you've had headlines in the paper and on TV saying higher tax for libraries, who gets blamed for that amount?
The interesting thing is that the library folks, it's a real grassroots organization. It's not mega lobbyists that are working on it. It's not a heavily funded organization, though it did get the Greater Miami Chamber and the Knight Foundation. The Chamber requested a poll to be done for library support, which Knight Foundation funded, and it came out with a lot of support. I think it's people use libraries more than realize, and if nothing else, just like knowing that it's there. It's like knowing, your grandma is nearby, even though you don't necessarily go visit her every day, much less call her.
That we call it the Knight Foundation poll, but it was Knight Foundation and Chamber of Commerce, was really interesting because both groups were sort of quietly saying, we need to support libraries here, and there was a trumpeting the poll saying that there was overwhelming support for library services. But what commissioners pointed out at the meeting was, wait a minute, that poll also said 58% do not want to pay higher taxes for libraries. And when they were asked, would you cut other government services to help libraries, they said, absolutely. And the follow-up questions were, great, what about police? No. Okay, what about human services, welfare? Absolutely not. And they sort of went down the line. They did agree to cut infrastructure in favor of libraries.
The mayor has a quote out that says that one of the things he was trying to do was really advocate that this is the worst scenario budget. It's not the budget that he really wants. That what he would really advocate is to help the seniors to help the poor, those who live on fixed incomes, and to help junior level administrators. Some have said it's a different tone, a different message, but what do you think?
Well, this is the new anti-union message, which is, the Mayor Noon's message is, listen, if we raise taxes, that money will go into union members' pockets in terms of higher pay. And what he's saying, I mean, this is his budget. It's not worst case or best case. This is the budget he proposed. And it calls for all these cuts, calls for higher fares, transit fares for disabled riders. But what he's saying is, listen, we don't have to do this if unions will agree to concessions, to continue essentially the concessions they agreed to 3 years ago. They're getting ready to automatically kick back in and sort of restore full pay. Exactly. And
which means amongst the issues you have flex pay is at issue, premiums. There's a lot of freebies you don't see in private sector, certainly. And we say freebies because it just seems that you find it more in public sector now than you do anywhere else. But that's what's at play right now. The mayor says that if he gets these concessions, they will not have to lay off any employee or nearly any employee. Is that just a political statement, or is there some reality to that?
well, there's real money in the concessions, and the other part of that is he wants a 15% cut in healthcare costs via less generous healthcare plans. So that would be real money. And he's saying that, listen, if we can get those savings, we'll put it back into the budget. We'll save the positions, et cetera. But is that going to happen by October 1st? People are very skeptical of that.
I am it's fascinating to see how the unions lost in this political battle because they have received support from the county commission in the very recent past.
We'll stay tuned because last year the budget was adopted with the tax rates that assumed the continuation of the 5% paycheck deduction, which went to basically reduce the county's healthcare costs. And then the commissioners in the middle of the year restored that over Jimenez's veto. So there's a lot of things that can still be done.
A lot going on from here to the fall.